Good afternoon. As I said in my previous video, today is September 1st, 2025, and it's Labor Day, in which we celebrate the contributions of working people. I very much support working people, and I greatly believe in the value of labor unions. Has all the work unions done been good? No. Has there been any corruption? Yes. But that's true in every organization, every aspect of life. We have um, I'm proud to be a union man. I'm also proud to be a Freemason for over 50 years. I talked earlier today about the Knights of Labor, one of the early unions, and a very um, interesting organization. And today, this video, I want to talk about two men who were also involved in unions, but they were involved in a lot of other things too. And I'm talking about the Parsons brothers, William and Albert. Both were Freemasons, but they were not your typical Texas Masons. Both had knelt at the Texas Masonic altars, Albert on one occasion and William on three occasions. Neither appears to have played a prominent role in his lodge. However, both were members of the Knights of Labor at one time, and Freemasonry influenced them in various ways. William Henry Parsons' claim to fame was his role as a Confederate colonel and commander of the Parsons Brigade, which served as a cavalry for the Army of the Trans-Mississippi. During the spring of 2002, his memory was honored with the naming of the William Henry Parsons Camp of number 415 of the Sons of Confederate Veterans in Ennis, Ellis County, Texas. That was in the spring of 2002. It was on November 16th of 2002 that I was appointed as pastor of the Wayman Chapel AME Church in Ennis, Texas. And I had contact with a number of members of the SCV camp. I was pastor at Wayman Chapel for 14 years before being reassigned to my current appointment, which is Bethel AME Church, Corsicana. Albert Richard Parsons' main claim to fame was his role as a radical socialist activist, hanged under doubtful circumstances following a bomb attack on the police at the Haymarket riot. William Henry Parsons was born on April 23rd of 1826 near Orange, New Jersey. His parents were Samuel and Hannah Broadwell Parsons. While he was still a small child, his father moved the family to Montgomery, Alabama. He attended Emory College in Oxford, Georgia, but withdrew in 1844 to enlist in the Army during the Mexican War. And then February 18th, 1851, he married Louisa Dennard of Jefferson, Texas. 5 children were born to this union. 1852, he became editor of the Tyler Telegraph. Then in 1855, he moved to Hill County, Texas, where he operated a farm along the Brazos River while working at nearby Fort Graham as a lawyer and a merchant. Then in 1859, he moved to Waco, my hometown, where he bought a 3.5-acre lot along the west side of Waco Creek and what is now the southwest border of my alma mater, Baylor University. The lot now lies on the southwest side of South 8th Street, partially covered by Interstate 35. And during 1860 and 61, he edited a newspaper entitled The Southwest. This weekly was devoted to the cause of Southern rights. At that time, he was an outspoken white supremacist who advocated reopening the African slave trade. That's no good. He may have changed later, though we're not 100% sure. And he was concerned about the purity of blood and supremacy as a distinct race of the Anglo-American upon the continent. And unless he later had radical changes of heart, he strongly disapproved of his brother Albert's contributions to such mongrel results, as he called them. However, he never disowned Albert and at least tolerated his non-white sister-in-law, Lucy Parsons, and his mulatto son and daughter, Albert and Lucy. 1861, William moved to Waxahachie, the county seat of Ellis County, and by this time it appeared the war between the states was inevitable. There was no turning back. He soon was commissioned as a colonel by Governor Edward Clark, who had become governor. He had been lieutenant governor before, but he became governor after the state legislature put Sam Houston out of office because of his refusal to take the oath of allegiance to the Confederacy and his insistence that secession was suicidal, an insistence that proved correct. Throughout the war, the Parsons Brigade served as scouts and raiders along the west bank of the Mississippi from Missouri to Louisiana. They marched from Sims Bayou near Houston to Little Rock, where they fought the army of General Samuel R. Curtis, forcing retreat back to the White River to call for reinforcements. And in August of 1862, they captured Curtis' rear support forces near Helena, Arkansas, and secured the strategically important area between Helena and the White River. They participated in numerous skirmishes that eventually resulted in the defeat of the Federal campaign against Little Rock. And during the siege of Vicksburg, they moved south to a position opposite the city where they defeated two Federal garrisons in northern Louisiana. And the best known endeavor was the ejection of Major General Nathaniel Banks' army from Louisiana during the Red River campaign. In 1864, in fact, it was on April 8th that the Battle of Mansfield and DeSoto Parish took place. And the following day, the Battle of Pleasant Hill in neighboring Sabine Parish took place. And those battles were the only thing that stopped the Yankees from invading Texas. My wife's ancestors, the Durhams, were slaves in DeSoto Parish. And I'm not sure exactly how close they were to the battlefield of Mansfield, but I've been there several times. Mansfield's a beautiful community. I'm hoping to attend the reenactment of the Battle of Pleasant Hill next April, God willing. But these rugged rebels fought for another year and were finally discharged May 23rd, 1865, when William addressed his men for the last time, saying, "You are once again citizens of Texas." He had some more experience in journalism. He edited the Daily Telegram, which was Houston's daily. And from 1869 to 71, he represented Harris, Montgomery, Henderson, and Van Zandt counties in the state Senate. 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant appointed him a United States Centennial Commissioner. And he moved to New York City, involved in planning of the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial. He later served as Commissioner of Immigration in New York, Customs Commissioner in Newport News, Virginia, and a staff member of the U.S. Department of the Treasury in Washington, D.C. By the late 1870s, his first wife had died. He married Myra Berry, who also preceded him in death. William died April 3rd, 1907, at the home of his son Edgar in Chicago, and was buried next to Myra at Mount Hope Cemetery in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Interesting, he was born in the North, died in the North, buried in the North. But many of his major contributions were in the South, including his role as a Confederate colonel. William Henry Parsons, was initiated as an apprentice mason on January 3rd, 1852. Passed to the degree of fellowcraft January 31st, 1852. Raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason March 3rd, 1852. All in St. John Lodge number 53 in Tyler. His name does not appear on the lodge's report in 1857, so I don't know what happened. And the Grand Lodge of Illinois and the Grand Lodge of Virginia, two states where he lived, has no record that he ever affiliated there. While in Virginia, he became involved with the Knights of Labor. Although he did not share his brother's socialist views, he became somewhat of a reformer in his own right. He wrote a pamphlet called National Depression, Cause and Remedy, and addressed the Congressional Labor Committee. And he charged the financial contractions manipulated from Washington caused depressions, and that a deliberate financial conspiracy had prevented the South from rebuilding after the war. At the 1886 General Assembly of the Knights of Labor, George A. Schelling, a friend of both of the Parsons brothers, announced the forthcoming publication of William's book, Dawn of the Social Revolution, a history of the Haymarket bombing and a trial from the standpoint as the Knights of Labor, as well as a brother of one of the defendants. He took an indefinite leave from his job, and within a few months had written over 800 pages. The book was never published because William refused to turn over the manuscript to the anarchist Dyer D. Lum. 1886, he came to Chicago to assist in Albert's defense. And he said, "I'm an older brother of the defendant. He came to me as an orphan boy, and I partially raised him, therefore knew his character morally and intellectually." William was 22 years older than Albert. The parents died when Albert was a small child, and William raised him. Many people thought that Albert was his son, but he was actually his brother. And he learned the printing trade in the office of Galveston, Texas News. Albert did. I have no contact with him personally or otherwise since 1871. I've scarcely kept up with the public record, except that I knew he was editor of a paper in the city of Chicago called The Alarm. It was a socialistic paper. I knew nothing of the tenants. I never read the paper. I never got it. Personally, I never investigated socialism, never studied the subject, do not understand it myself. And family, in conversing upon the subject, have repudiated it as a political heresy. But it is not true as charged by the press in New York that the Parsons family had repudiated and disowned him personally. I am here and concluding hours of the trial because blood is stronger than water, and from sheer brotherly sympathy. It is the injunction of our master. I was sick and in prison, and you visited me. So he worked with Albert's defense, and probably had some dealings at that point with Albert's wife, Lucy. Albert Richard Parsons was born on the feast of St. John the Baptist, June 24th, 1848, in Montgomery, Alabama. Both parents died before Albert reached the age of 5. As a result, he was sent to Tyler, Texas to live with his brother William. From 1855 to 1859, the family lived on a farm in Hill County. Then in 1859, they moved to Waco. At the age of 12, Albert decided to learn the printing trade and became apprentice to William Richardson of the Galveston Daily News. When the Civil War began, he joined the Lone Star Grays, a Confederate volunteer company. He was 13. Was this an act of his own free will and accord? Did he want to just follow his brothers into service? Did he believe in the Confederate cause and later renounce it? I don't know. Was he forced against his will to join? I don't know. He served as a powder monkey for an artillery unit at Sabine Pass. And in the final years of the war, he served under his brother as a scout in the Parsons Brigade. Following the war, he returned to Waco, where he studied political economy and moral philosophy for 6 months at Waco University, now Baylor University. Baylor was originally located in Independence, Texas. 1861, Rufus C. Burleson resigned as president of Baylor. And he moved to Waco, became president of Waco University, and brought Baylor's entire male faculty with him. And in 1886, Waco University merged with Baylor as Baylor moved to Waco. It was in the fall of 1986 that I began PhD studies in Baylor. I remember reading an announcement on campus about Baylor's 100 years in Waco. It was, by the way, in 1995, Baylor was founded in Independence, 1845. And 1995 was the sesquicentennial class. My daughter Erica and I were both part of that class. Erica received her BA. I received my PhD in the same ceremony. And the 1867, Albert began to publish The Spectator, a radical Republican newspaper that advocated full civil rights for African Americans and acceptance of the terms of surrender. He traveled throughout Central Texas, registering freed slaves to vote. He hired some former slaves to work for him, and in some of these cases, this was the first time these men had ever worked for wages. But he traveled throughout Central Texas, and he was shot in the leg, thrown downstairs, beaten, and threatened with lynching. Not everybody in the Central Texas area was on board with the things that Albert was trying to do. And he married a woman named Lucy. She appears to have been of Black, Mexican, and Native American ancestry. 2 children, Albert Jr. and Lulu, were born to this union. When Reconstruction ended in Texas, he was denounced as a miscegenationist, a scallywag, a traitor, and a revenue man. Due to threats from the Ku Klux Klan, Albert and Lucy got out of Waco. They moved to Chicago. Upon arrival in the Windy City, Albert quickly became a leading agitator for social change. The railroad strikes of July 1877 brought him into the limelight. After a series of defeats as a candidate for public office, he rejected electoral politics and began to call himself an anarchist, using the terms anarchist and socialist interchangeably. He helped organize the Chicago Trades and Labor Council, threw himself into agitation for the 8-hour workday. On October 1884, he became editor of The Alarm, a publication of the International Working People's Association. On May 1st, 1886, he and his wife led a march of 80,000 strikers and supporters up Michigan Avenue. 2 days later, violence erupted at the McCormick Reaper plant. The anarchists called for a meeting on the night of May 4th at the Haymarket Square to protest police brutality. Albert delivered a speech and left the city. Nearly 200 policemen marched into the square. An unknown person threw a bomb, and police began to shoot wildly. Keep in mind, Albert Parsons was not there when this happened. Nobody ever claimed that Albert threw the bomb or that even knew who threw the bomb. What they claimed was that his speeches and writings had inspired the bomb thrower. A number of known radicals were jailed, and he had left Chicago, but he was arrested upon return. He turned himself in. He and several other anarchists were charged with conspiracy on the grounds their speeches and writings might have inspired the bomb thrower. All were convicted. Then on November 11th, 1887, Albert and 3 others were hanged. Another defendant died in jail as a result of either murder or suicide. 6 years later, Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld pardoned the 3 remaining defendants. While living in Waco, Albert had followed William's footsteps and became a Freemason. On May the 9th, 1868, he was initiated as an entered apprentice in Waco Lodge number 92, my home lodge. I have found no evidence that he ever received any other Masonic degrees in Texas or Illinois. However, on November 11th, 1887, shortly before going to the gallows, he said to bailiff William B. Brainerd, "I'm a Mason and have always tried to help my fellow men all my life. I'm going out of the world with a clear conscience. I die that others may live." He then extended a Masonic grip and a word to Brainerd. My friend Robert Marshall has gotten, who is past master and secretary of Waco 92, has gotten permission from the Grand Master of Illinois to perform Masonic graveside services for Albert Parsons at the Waldheim Cemetery in Chicago. I hope that happens. On July 4th, 1876, the time of America's centennial, Albert visited Indianapolis to address the meeting of the Social Democratic Party of North America. There he met state organizer Calvin A. Light, who initiated him into the Knights of Labor. The following year, he helped organize the Knights of Labor Council for Assembly 400 in Chicago. He later served one term as master workman and 2 terms as a delegate to District Assembly 24. At the 1886 General Assembly in Richmond, Virginia, there was a near unanimous vote in support of a resolution of sympathy for Albert and the other anarchists under sentence to death. The resolution was passed, even though there was some opposition. Following Albert's execution, his funeral was conducted by District Assembly number 1307 of the Knights of Labor, and later the Albert R. Parsons Assembly of the Knights of Labor in Chicago was named in his honor. The burial took place December 18th, 1887 in Waldheim Cemetery in Chicago, known as the Haymarket Martyrs. And attorney Captain William Perkins Black told the crowd, "We do not stand before the caskets of felons consigned to an inglorious tomb. We are here by the bodies of men who were sublime of their self-sacrifice and for whom the gibbet assumed the glory of the cross." There is an actress in Chicago named Alma Washington who plays the part of Lucy Parsons, and I think she's done some presentations at ceremonies at the Haymarket Martyrs Cemetery. If I ever go to Chicago, that would be a place I'd like to stop. Her parentage, Lucy Parsons, has always been mysterious. She attributed her dark skin to her Mexican and Indian ancestry, but she was probably born in slavery in Texas. Prior to her marriage to Albert, she lived in Waco with a former slave named Oliver Gathings. And although the Parsons family denied publicly that Lucy was black, it's been suggested that the family privately considered her black. She definitely has African features. It is possible that she, as well as Oliver Gathings, was a slave to the wealthy Gathings brothers, James J. and Philip Gathings, who owned 62 slaves in 1860. That's in Covington, Texas, near Hillsboro. I've been to that cemetery and seen the Gathings brothers' grave. They were the leading slave owners in Hill County in 1860. Philip had a daughter named Lucy, born in 1849. It is possible that a slave child born 4 years later would have been named after the master's child. The most precise birth date available is March 1853. 1860, James J. Gathing and Philip Gathings each owned 2 little girls who were about Lucy Parsons' age. However, the slaveholders provide only age, sex, and color, Negro or mulatto. They don't give names, and that's a problem with black genealogy, though methods of research have improved in recent years. There are other stories of Lucy Parsons' origins, but her relationship to author Oliver Gathens, as well as most frequent publicized and repeated, with the exception of her own stories, which conflict with each other. Um, she sometimes used the name Gonzalez, and again, she may have had some Mexican ancestors. She was fully supportive of her husband's activism. She, along with Mother Jones, widely known as the most dangerous woman in America, were among the first women to join the Knights of Labor. She and Albert insisted the wage slaves of 1884 were no better off than the chattel slaves of 1860. She always maintained the conviction that working class revolution would eliminate not only poverty but also racial and sexual discrimination. Following her husband's execution, she devoted the remainder of her 89 years to the cause of revolutionary socialism. She wrote newspaper columns, published books and pamphlets, and traveled and lectured extensively. She was one of the founders of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, also known as the Wobblies. It appears throughout her life, Lucy maintained some contact with her husband's relatives, including his nephew Edgar, who was the son of Colonel William Henry Parsons. And Edgar may have been the one who notified her of her son's death. The Haymarket affair and Albert Parsons' execution was a heavy burden on the Parsons family. Albert Jr.'s traumatic childhood resulted in his commitment to a mental institution for the rest of his life. When he wanted to join the Army at the time of the Spanish-American War, Lucy had him declared insane, and he was put in this mental hospital. He died there of tuberculosis 20 years later. I've seen his medical records that are found in the Texas collection at Baylor. Edgar Albert Parsons' wife, a young bride in 1886, felt tremendously disgraced by Albert R. Parsons' execution and kept the story concealed for many years. Only when her children found a trunk containing newspaper accounts of the execution among their grandfather, William Henry Parsons' possessions, did she finally admit that Albert Parsons was their great uncle, with whom their father had grown up in Texas. Edgar Parsons received injury reports and notification of the death of Albert Parsons Jr. from Northern Illinois Hospital for the Insane. Edgar must have maintained some contact with Lucy, and it may have been him who notified her of her son's death. Lucy died in a fire at her home in Chicago, March 7th, 1942. World War II had just started. She was buried next to the Haymarket Monument at Chicago's Waldheim Cemetery. On the day following the fire, it was learned that her large library, books, pamphlets, and papers had been removed. The whereabouts of these items were never discovered, and it appears the Chicago police, the Chicago Red Squad, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation feared even a dead Lucy Parsons. At one point, a tramp on the streets of Chicago had said he was thinking about doing himself in, and she said, if you do that, what you need to do is learn the use of explosives and take some rich people with you. But this was the end, the ironic end of the life of the widow of a Confederate scout who was initiated as an inter-apprentice Mason, and of the sister-in-law of the master Mason who led the Parsons Brigade. It's certainly clear that the Parsons brothers were not your typical Texas Masons. Happy Labor Day. God bless all.